Earlier this morning, the House Foreign Affairs Committee held a hearing on the USAID betrayal. And if there was any doubt over the accusations of waste and abuse of taxpayer dollars at the agency, well, House Republicans brought the receipts with them.
$3.3 million for being LGBTQ in the Caribbean, and $37.6 million for sex workers, their clients, and transgender individuals in South Africa.
That was Congresswoman Sherry Biggs of South Carolina. So what else came out of today's hearing? Well, join me now to discuss this, former USAID Deputy Administrator Max Primorac, who testified this morning at the hearing. He is currently the Senior Research Fellow in the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. Max, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So it would take quite a while to go through all of the examples of the waste and abuse, but more than that, this wasn't just, people neglecting to spend money. This was intentional. Talk about some of the things that really stood out to you testified about today.
Well, actually, it came from the top. As soon as President Biden came into office, immediately he disassembled everything that we had done under the Trump administration, international religious freedom, free market economics, and then used or misused foreign aid as a global platform to expose the woke ideology, DEI, gender fluidity, abortion, the climate agenda. And when you consider that 50% of this money stays here in Washington, D.C., not only was it a way of trying to remake the world in their progressive left-wing image, but it also provided a ton of money for all of their friends here. And we're talking a budget that went from about $22 billion in 2020 to about $44 billion right now. So they had a huge money pot to promote this progressive agenda.
Max, you were there. You came in after the Obama administration for the first Trump administration. By its nature, was this already kind of the direction that USAID was leaning?
Oh, absolutely. And when you look at FEC records, Federal Election Commission records on political contributions to candidates, you'll see that State Department, USAID, but also the entire foreign aid industry, 95% of their political donations go to the left. When I came into USAID, the big issue was the situation of the persecuted Christians in northern Iraq, where they were victims of genocide by ISIS. And we had such difficulty trying to get the bureaucrats to accept that we should be helping them. They came up with false arguments of, it's against the Establishment Clause, it's illegal, it's anti-constitutional. And it got so bad that the Vice President, Mike Pence, had to appoint myself as his envoy, and he sent me over there to Iraq for 18 months to be on the ground, have eyes and ears on the ground to make sure that the president's agenda of helping religious minorities get executed.
I remember that, Max. We actually had some conversations about that, and I had some conversations with the vice president. I also think, if my memory serves me correctly, we worked somewhat with the Hungarian government to help facilitate some of that because they had a little more flexibility to actually help out those Christians.
We did. We learned a lot from them. When I got there, they had a lot of good contacts. And we actually, by the end, we signed a memorandum of understanding, and we began to jointly fund programs in that part of Iraq.
So the USAID goes back to John F. Kennedy. He set it up to be kind of maybe a soft approach to foreign policy to bolster humanitarian assistance and such. But it's like any government program without, close observation and control. It takes on a life of its own. And this is from the White House, the Trump administration putting this out last week about the waste and abuse, $1.5 million to advance diversity and equity in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a DEI musical in Ireland, $2.5 million for electrical vehicles in Vietnam, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for transgender comics books in Peru, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Now, you'd say, well, $32,000 is not a lot. I don't know. It's the salary that some people make in this country, but this adds up, and that's what we're talking about. Is when you begin to cumulatively look at how this money is being spent and what it's promoting, it's out of control.
Well, you have PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief. That's a $6 billion a year program. That program, started by President Bush, it has saved millions and millions of lives. It was a Christian-based response to the crisis in Africa. But it got taken over by the left. They started funding International Planned Parenthood, UN organizations that promote abortion. And I was in Kenya and in Mozambique last year and meeting with a lot of Catholic, Anglican, and evangelical leaders, and they were horrified by the fact that this really good, godly program had suddenly become utterly corrupted, using it to push the trans ideology, pushing abortion. You know well that in Africa and most of the rest of the world, they're very conservative. And I've had so many of them coming to me and tell me, the communist Chinese don't require me to sacrifice my religious convictions in order to do business with them. Unfortunately, under the Biden administration, I mean, they took it in a direction that was completely extreme.
Max, I'm glad you brought up those 2 points, because I think it's very critical, because actually some of the media reports about the efforts to cut USAID are comparing it to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is their outreach. But you're right, there are no strings attached to their funding. Now, well, I shouldn't say that. There are strings, there are financial strings, because they end up usually foreclosing on their loan and taking the property and the minerals from these countries. But they're not imposing some kind of immoral agenda on them like our government is doing or what our government did do under the Biden administration. But you mentioned PEPFAR. And I'm glad you brought that up, because actually today in your testimony, it was interrupted right as you were starting by demonstrators saying, fund PEPFAR, fund PEPFAR. PEPFAR was funded. It was extended, and I think it comes up for reauthorization, I think, in March. But to your point, you're absolutely correct. And it started out 20 years ago as a good program, but it has been hijacked, and it is not the same. But you have some of the same voices saying, oh, we got to reauthorize it, we got to reauthorize it. But it is the left's agenda wrapped in the right's title.
Absolutely. And there was so much disinformation that I heard during the remarks by some of the members of Congress this morning. Number one, accusing the administration of responsibility for people dying because they're not getting their medicines. In fact, Secretary Rubio not only gave a waiver, but the monies are flowing out there. What President Trump is doing is what the American people want. They want to make sure that every dollar we spend is in America's interests and aligns with American values. So as the administration goes through, or what are something like 20,000 individual project activities funded by our foreign aid, they're going through to make sure that all of this nonsense is taken out. And this is the only way that we can reestablish the trust of the American people, that their charitable impulse, and they're the most charitable people on the face of the planet, is not being misused by people to fund things that are completely outside of the norms.
Max, let me ask you this question. As there's been kind of a suspension of USAID, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has taken over as the administrator. Is that the right approach to just basically, I think we're eliminating most of the workforce and rolling it into the State Department? Do you think that would be the best approach in the future if we're going to maintain any elements of USAID?
Well, they've been put on administrative leave to give them some time to be able to look at what they want to do with the foreign aid apparatus overall. It's not just USAID that gets money. It's also the State Department. It's also HHS, the Centers for Disease Control. There's about 20 different federal departments and agencies that get money. So they're going to have to work through the difficulty of the fact that President Biden corrupted every single nook and cranny. And then they're going to make their own judgment. The Secretary of State has made very clear that he recognizes there's a lot of good things that can be done with foreign aid, and foreign aid should be a very powerful weapon to promote our values and our interests. It just hasn't been, and because it's so broken, I think that he's forced to take these steps.
Well, I think that'd be the best way, just rebuild. Sometimes you can remodel, other times you just got to tear it down and rebuild. I think that's where we are at, and it's the moment in time that we have the opportunity. But I want to go back, Max, to something, because I want our viewers and listeners to clearly understand this. What you testified to today, what's been uncovered in the spending of USAID, you just made a reference to this. This was not mission creep. It was not drift. This was intentional. This came from the White House to all agencies to basically put the pedal to the metal and advance this radical ideological agenda that advanced these anti-family values.
Oh, absolutely. USAID, you mentioned John F. Kennedy, who started it, and it was an anti-Soviet program. It was very effective. After the fall of the Soviet Union, foreign aid was used to help integrate the former countries of the Warsaw Pact. That was very effective. But we saw already with the Clinton administration, specifically Hillary Clinton, start to push this agenda, first and foremost, the abortion agenda. And then under President Obama, we saw an acceleration of that, plus the LGBT agenda, plus the climate agenda, and then a little bit of the DEI. But I tell you, when President Biden came in, they went all out. They accelerated this. It almost seemed as if the purpose of foreign aid was not to promote our interests, but simply to serve as a money pot to promote this progressive ideology, not only overseas, but at home as well, because they created an army of politicals that support their agenda. So they're in the media, they're on television, they're on boards, they're everywhere. So every time we have elections, they exercise completely out of proportion influence on the electorate, and it's on the American taxpayer's dime.
Right. So they were leveraging taxpayer dollars to, for instance, George Soros, who his son received the presidential medal on the final days of the Biden administration. They were leveraging U.S. tax dollars because it was basically like one of these matches. We're going to put up half and you put up half, and we're going to help fund you in what you're doing in terms of your anti-freedom agenda overseas.
Absolutely. They were also doing it with the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Gates Foundation. They were actually co-financing projects with organizations that actually had close relationships with the Communist Party of China. So it was a total mess.
Well, we're almost out of time, Max, but you mentioned some names here that have popped back up, and the Trump administration kind of getting cozy. We need to be watching some of these individuals, should we not?
We should be very closely watching these individuals. Absolutely. I don't think they necessarily turned. They didn't just simply convert to Christianity all of a sudden. I think there's some self-interest, but I trust the president. I trust his folks. They know exactly who these people are, and I think it's our job in the think tank world to help them out.
Max Primorac, I want to thank you for joining us. Always great to see you, my friend. Thanks for the work you do.
Thank you. God bless you.